Welcome to In Solidarity, the podcast run by openDemocracy. My name is Sian Norris, and I'm a senior investigations reporter on the UK team. And I'm delighted to be joined today by author and activist Nasrin Parvaz. As a young woman in the 1980s, Nasrin was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured by the Iranian regime. In recent years, we've seen another upsurge in opposition to Iran's leaders, with the Women, Life, Freedom movement, otherwise known as the Women's Revolution. Young women and men have taken to the streets, dancing and singing in protest, removing their hijabs and facing horrific violence and torture as a result. I wanted to talk to Nasrin about the Women's Life, Freedom movement, about her hopes for the future of Iran, and about what the situation is for Iranian women and men today. With a Trump in the White House, with a changing world order, and with the continued Western opposition to the Iranian regime that still manages to fail to engage with the people's movements and the women's movements on the ground. I was wondering if we could kick off this conversation by going back to the past and going back to your experiences of being arrested and imprisoned in Iran in the 1980s. Could you tell us a little bit about your history of political involvement and what happened to you as a result of your political activism?
When the Islamic regime took power, it introduced misogynistic laws. So like many young people of the time, I became active. So I was arrested in 1982 and I was released in 1990. When I was arrested, I was taken to the Joint Committee Interrogation Center. The interrogation center was so crowded with prisoners that they didn't have any empty cells. So they put me in a corridor where other prisoners were also being kept. There were spaces between prisoners to make sure we didn't talk to each other, and guards were watching us. We were all wearing blindfolds day and night. We sat and slept there on the floor with only a blanket. 20 years later, the regime turned that interrogation center to a prison museum and said they never used it. I was kept there for 6 months. They interrogated me about my friends and my activities. I didn't give them any information about my friends, so they tortured me. At that time, one of the torture methods they used was bastinado. They fastened my hands and feet on each side of the torture gurney, which is a kind of bed, and they lashed the soles of my feet with a cable. Later on, they hit my head into the wall, which made me epileptic. They tortured prisoners into doing false confessions on TV. They were forced to say that they were mistaken in having struggled against the regime and that they were spies from the other countries, a foreign country. They broke the hands and legs of prisoners when forcing them into doing a confession. At that point, they gave me electric shock. Some prisoners died under torture. But I have to say, the massacre of prisoners in 1988 was very intense. That time, in particular, stands out for me. They executed more than 5,000 prisoners. They took more than 50 prisoners from the wing I was in, and they never came back.
And one of the things that really strikes me there's so much horror in your retelling, but this idea that they denied that they ever used this center, this rewriting of history, and the traumatic impact that has on survivors to be told that something didn't happen, that this place never existed, that your experience is invalid. And I think that's why it's so important we have these conversations to say, actually, no, this did happen. we can speak out, we will say what happened to us. I mean, what was the mental process when you heard that they'd made this museum and denied your experience of your friends and your colleagues?
Actually, when I heard that, at first I couldn't believe it. And then a friend of mine brought a CD that was about um, the prison museum. And they were selling those CDs in the museum. And she brought one for me. And I thought there is a story there. And that made me to write a novel that is set in the interrogation center, which I spent 6 months in.
And it's a way of reclaiming that history and saying it was true, it happened.
Exactly.
And of course, I mean, thank goodness you left the prison, you came to the UK, you are living safely now, but this situation is continuing, including for friends of yours and for women you know. And I know you wanted to talk about the experience of one of your friends who's in prison now.
The situation is the same. I can talk about one of the prisoners. Zainab Jalalian has been in prison for 17 years, and she was arrested in 2007. At first, Zainab was sentenced to execution, but her sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. She was charged with waging war against God. A few years ago, she wrote to her mother about how they tortured her. Can I read a short paragraph of her?
Yeah, no, please do.
Thank you. She wrote, "My pen is unable to describe my pain and distress. They blindfolded me, tore off my clothes, chained me to an iron bed, and lashed my feet with a cable. My feet became black and swollen under torture. Eventually, I didn't feel anything. My entire body became numb. Under torture, I had my beliefs and my hope for women who are struggling for a better future. How can I witness the execution of my friends and say nothing? They are asking me to confess to wrongdoing in order to receive medical treatment. How can I regret struggling against them?" I'll finish her paragraph here, but Zainab is suffering from a number of illnesses which are the result of torture. She is losing her eyesight. She has asthma, kidney pain, and digestive problems. 5 years ago, she was transferred to Yazd prison. During the last 5 years, she has had only 10 minutes of visitation with her mother. That means she doesn't have visit with her family. Zainab's health problems increased when they hit her head with an iron rod. It seems the regime want to kill her as they are not providing any medical treatment for her. And she isn't the first person who has endured this. The regime has killed many prisoners as a result of denying medical treatment.
And I mean, when you talk about Zainab's experience and your experience, it really reminds me of when I've interviewed victims and survivors of torture before, just the brutal simplicity of so much of it, the fact that we go back to these medieval cruelties. You can pick up anything and it becomes a torture instrument. You can deny someone medical care and that is a form of torture. You can deny them access to their family and loved ones and that is the form of torture.
Exactly.
And the kind of emotional, psychological and physical aspects of it.
The women's protest movement started when the Islamic regime took power. I mean, my generation came to the street against the compulsory hijab. And I know women who traveled from small towns to Tehran in order to join that demonstration. But it took a couple of years until the regime could force women to cover their hair. Women who didn't accept the hijab lost their jobs. I remember going to demonstrations against this law and the Islamic guards running after us with sticks, beating anyone they could reach. The morality police had been patrolling the streets looking to arrest any woman who didn't have a proper hijab. My generation was defeated, but the movement stayed alive. And the Women Life Freedom Uprising brought hope. And the regime used different methods of crackdown on their uprising. They tortured child protesters. Hundreds of people have been killed in the street. Hundreds of people have been shot in the eyes, especially women, young women. They used extrajudicial execution. Hundreds of protesters have been killed under torture and their bodies were dumped in the street. Many prisoners died a few days after their release. At first, their families thought they'd committed suicide, but later on, it was clear that they'd been poisoned in prison. In one point, the regime set some of the wards in Evin prison on fire. They shot prisoners running from the fire and justified this by saying that the prisoners were trying to escape. The rape of underage girls in prison was one of the methods used to discourage demonstrations. And the regime didn't hide the use of rape in order to frighten underage girls from being arrested.
I think it's really important, as you say, as well, to recognize that resistance didn't start in 2023. The resistance started at the point of the Islamic Revolution, that there is a heritage and a history of women's protest and women's resistance in Iran. And it was, that women can look to that history and learn from that history and know that they are not standing alone is so vital. Despite the horrific crackdown on protests and everything you've described, we are still seeing the protests take place. We are still seeing women resist through dancing, through singing. And could you talk a little bit about the resistance we are seeing on the ground?
Women now, women are going out without scarves. There are street theaters. There are forbidden public performances of singing and dancing by women. They take place every day in different parts of the country. Many of these females performers have been arrested for singing and dancing in public. Women are wearing styles of clothes forbidden by the regime. Men also aren't allowed to wear shorts, but now they don't comply with the law and go out with shorts. And most importantly, which is, they used to arrest and still arrest girls and boys if they do such thing, is that girls and boys kiss in the street. The thing is, though politically the revolution didn't happen, the woman life freedom revolution haven't happened yet, but there was a cultural revolution,
And I think even the name of the revolution, Women, Life, Freedom, it is about living. It is about freedom. It is, kissing the person you fancy on the street, like dancing because you feel like dancing. These are things that represent the joy of life and the joy of having freedom. And, it sends a message that you cannot take those joys away. You can try, and goodness knows the regime does whatever it can to try to do that, but that people will cling on to these joys and these precious moments because they're the things that make life worth living.
How do we stop the global rise of fascism? Why is disinformation so rife in our societies? Do arms dealers rule the world? Hi, my name's Maxine Betteridge-Mose, and I'm the host of New Internationalist's brand new podcast series, The World Unspun. Every 2 weeks, we bring the pages of our award-winning print magazine to life through fascinating conversations with our global contributors. Whether it's historian Vijay Prashad talking about the arms trade,
Keir Starmer can talk as much as he wants about being a human rights lawyer. The fact is he's an arms dealer.
political analyst Nanjala Niabola on how big tech drives disinformation,
We've made it the most sexy and the most profitable industry in the world. So everybody wants a piece, whether they have good intentions or they have bad intentions.
or on-the-ground reporters like Harold Isaac, who provide insight and analysis on today's top stories.
When you're here, it's an act of resistance because the deck are stacked against us.
Subscribe and listen to The World Unspun wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, we say that politically the revolution hasn't succeeded, but I mean, what are your thoughts about what will come next?
I think women are sick of their situation, of the misogynistic laws and everyday humiliation. They will revolt again, and at any time that is possible. The thing is that there are two ropes hanging over the heads of women in Iran. One is in the hands of their male relatives, and the other is in the hands of the regime. In some traditional households, women are severely punished or killed for not following the family rules. This is called honor killing. But the thing is, the law permits men to kill their female relatives and walk free. But if a woman kills her abusive husband, she'll be executed. Men wouldn't be killing their wives or daughters if there were consequences to their actions. I mean, all these are a pressure on women that 2022 uprising showed that they cannot bear it anymore. And if the regime didn't use extreme crackdown, it wouldn't exist now.
I think there's so much to unpick there, particularly around the idea of sort of, domestic abuse and family violence against women and girls, which obviously we know is something that happens in every country in the world, including in the UK. And even in the UK, when we look at the sentencing of women who kill their abusive husbands compared to abusers who kill their wives, there is a disparity in the length of sentence. There's still this idea that women, we're not allowed to, legally you can't use this defense anymore, but the idea that a woman nagged or had an affair and therefore brought the violence on herself is something we see in every country. And I think it speaks as well to this need for global feminism, global sisterhood,
Yes.
where we can see the commonalities of experience, even in different contexts.
Wow.
I was wondering if you could reflect on that idea about global sisterhood and women working together to fight against men's violence and patriarchal control.
Yeah, but when the 2022 uprising in Iran started, I thought women in West would support that movement because it was the first women revolution, and then men in Iran started to following them, support them. And I thought, where are the granddaughters of the suffragettes. Unfortunately, the women of the West failed us.
Yeah.
See what the West did in Afghanistan. Women in the West didn't question their governments for that. Why not? Why we are just closing our eyes to what our governments are doing to our sisters? I think we are sharing the benefit of all the executions and all the suppression. Whatever happens, it's one world, it's like a one village.
The failure to reach out the hand of sisterhood, to stand in solidarity with our sisters around the world, is extremely troubling. It brings me on as well to a question about the West's general attitude to Iran and to regime change. There was a recent article in the Times by the son of the Shah talking about what he would like to see for Iran, and there's still this idea in the West that we kind of have a say or should get some kind of choice in what happens in the future of Iran. But what is it that we need to see for regime change that comes from the people, that comes from the people's desires, the people's needs, and the people's activism?
The thing is, Western governments fear people as much as the Iranian regime fears them. That's why the Western governments are always looking for alternatives with every regime that they support. Yeah, they supported the Iranian regime from the beginning. They asked Shah to go, and they brought Khomeini and his allies to Iran. But even with that, when people comes out, it frightens them because it will affect the region if people take power. And it's few years now that the Western governments are trying to form an alternative power to take over for a regime change in Iran when the time is coming, There are several Farsi TV stations that are funded by the West in order to promote a monarchist regime as an alternative power structure in Iran. Pahlavi, the ex-Shah son that you mentioned, lots of media coverage and is often invited to different countries that present him as the next ruler of Iran. One thing that is very interesting is monarchists have issued a death sentence for those who are against monarchy. That means if they come to power, they have to kill me because I'm against monarchy in every country, everywhere,
One of the things I wanted to ask you as well, as we get to the end of this conversation, is going back to this issue of torture. And I know that you do incredible work with the NGO Freedom from Torture based in the UK. I mean, we know that torture doesn't work. We know that people who confess under torture are not necessarily confessing anything true because they're being tortured. And yet there is this persistent narrative that torture is a possible way to interrogate people and that it's needed. And we know that world leaders, including Trump, have expressed support or kind of passive support for torture in the past. I mean, now that we're in this kind of 2025, Trump's back in power, these violent regimes are being sort of emboldened by the actions of the White House. I mean, what are your concerns and fears about what message this sends about torture and the use of torture around the world?
What Trump said about torture is the same thing that the Islamic regime and all the dictators say, that they all support use of torture. And it's justifying torture and oppression. It's interesting. When I heard this, I thought only a torturer can say such things, and it works for who? I have seen many prisoners who went under torture and didn't reveal the names and addresses of their friends. Some prisoners died under torture, but didn't reveal their information. I was tortured and I was paralyzed by that torture, but I didn't give them names and addresses of my friends. Like so many other prisoners, I prefer to die than cause the arrest and torture of more people. I have to say, torture is painful and some people might not be able to bear it and they give up their information. But these people will suffer for the rest of their lives.
Yes, and also information gained under torture, you can never know if it's true information or not because people will say things to make it stop. And this idea that it's effective or can be used in order to get the right information is fundamentally flawed because you'll never know if it's true. And I think it's really key again to this idea that the people who defend torture they are standing with authoritarian regimes, murderous regimes, and they are showing that their commonality and their agreement with those same regimes and those same people that cause such harm.
Exactly.
And what are your hopes for the future? What are your hopes for the future of Iran?
I hope the West leave us alone so people can decide. There are so many bright people who knows what they want, who want a secular government. People can, there are workers activists, women activists. They can decide for themselves. They don't need a Western government come and put another dictators on top of the country. I know it's for oil and for other resources in Iran and like other countries. That's why they try to come to agreement with this regime or make a regime change. But I hope people in the West stop their governments to interfere to other countries like Iran, so people in Iran can decide for themselves. And in that case, of course, I'm very hopeful because people know what they want. And Iran is rich. We don't need to beg Western governments to help us,
I just have one more question, and it's a question we ask everybody who takes part in the podcast. As you know, the podcast is called In Solidarity, and our question is, what does solidarity mean to you?
Solidarity is your interview with me, giving me a voice and making people to hear about what's going on in Iran, what's going on in prison right now. Prisoners who are under torture and are sentenced to execution. Solidarity means helping each other and doesn't recognize borders and trying to hear what women, especially women, all people are suffering, but especially women and children are going through in other countries, like now in Palestine, in Gaza, what's going on. Actually, during last 2 years, I saw lots of solidarity of people towards Palestinian people. What's going on there is really depressing, but seeing this solidarity is, it gives me hope.
Absolutely. And we say before, the importance of global sisterhood, of holding hands across borders, of recognizing our shared experience of oppression and men's violence is vital. And it's, if we are to fight back as a movement, we must fight back as a global movement.
Yeah, exactly.
In Solidarity is produced by James Battershill, Ayodeji Rotinwa, and Carla Abreu. The theme song is Odyssey by Edward Abela. If you've not already subscribed, then please don't forget to do so, and also leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, you can do so at openDemocracy.net/donate. And if you want even more great global stories like this, then why not check out the Open Democracy newsletter? You can subscribe to that at openDemocracy.net/newsletters. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.